The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood before her bedroom mirror. Her hands trembled slightly as she fastened the simple black dress she had chosen for the day. Today was different from any other royal engagement she had attended. Today, the entire nation would be watching. Not for celebration, but for comfort in their shared grief. Just 3 days earlier, a devastating fire had torn through a primary school in Manchester, claiming the lives of 12 young children and 2 teachers. The images had flooded every newspaper and television screen across Britain. Families destroyed, a community shattered, and a nation struggling to comprehend such senseless loss. The children, aged between 5 and 8, had been attending their morning assembly when an electrical fault sparked, the blaze that would change everything. William entered the room quietly, his own formal attire reflecting the somber nature of their mission. The Duke of Cambridge had barely slept since receiving the news. As a father himself, the tragedy hit particularly close to home. His children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, were similar ages to those who had perished. The thought of any parent facing such unimaginable loss left him feeling helpless and heartbroken. "Are you ready for this?" Catherine asked, though she knew neither of them could truly be prepared for what lay ahead. They had attended many official functions, met with world leaders, and handled countless royal duties. But visiting grieving families required something different entirely. It demanded not just their presence, but their humanity. The couple had insisted on visiting Manchester personally, despite advisors suggesting written condolences might be more appropriate given the raw emotions involved. But William and Catherine felt strongly that the families deserved more than formal letters. These parents needed to see that their nation's representatives cared enough to stand with them in their darkest hour. Their car pulled away from Kensington Palace as morning rush hour began across London. The journey to Manchester would take several hours, giving them time to review the carefully prepared briefings about each family they would meet. Catherine read through the pages describing little Emma Thompson, who had loved drawing unicorns and wanted to become a veterinarian. 7-year-old James Mitchell, who collected football cards and dreamed of playing for Manchester United. Each child had been a complete person with hopes, dreams, and futures that would never unfold. The weight of these stories settled heavily in the car as they traveled north. William stared out the window at the passing countryside, his mind wrestling with questions that had no answers. How do you comfort a mother whose child will never come home? What words could possibly ease such devastating pain? The training for royal duties had covered many scenarios, but nothing quite prepared them for this level of human suffering. Catherine closed the briefing folder and looked at her husband. They had been through many challenges together since their marriage, but this felt different. This was about being present for others in a way that transcended their royal roles. They were about to enter a world of grief so profound that their very presence would need to speak volumes about the nation's solidarity. With these families, news crews had already gathered outside the community center where they would meet the families. The media attention was inevitable, but both William and Catherine hoped it would serve a purpose beyond mere documentation. Perhaps seeing their future king and queen taking time to grieve with ordinary citizens would help the broader public process their own feelings about the tragedy. Sometimes healing required witnessing others care enough to show up. As they approached Manchester, the reality of the situation became more tangible. This wasn't about protocol or ceremony. Today was about looking into the eyes of parents whose worlds had been shattered, and finding a way to honor both their children's memories and their ongoing pain. The simple act of being present, of choosing to share in their grief rather than observing from a distance, would prove to be one of the most powerful gestures of their royal careers. The car slowed as they neared their destination, where families waited who would never again experience the simple joy of their children running through the front door after school. William and Catherine prepared themselves to step into that reality, knowing that their genuine response to such profound loss would either provide comfort or add to the burden these families already carried. The afternoon brought an unexpected moment that would define the entire visit. As families began sharing lunch together in the community center, Catherine noticed a young woman sitting alone near the windows. Rebecca Torres, barely 22 years old, had been one of the teachers who died trying to evacuate her students. Her parents, Maria and Carlos, had arrived from Spain just that morning. Still struggling to comprehend that their daughter was gone, Rebecca had moved to Manchester only 6 months earlier to begin her teaching career. She spoke limited English, but her enthusiasm for working with children had quickly made her beloved among students and colleagues alike. On the morning of the fire, witnesses said she had run back into the burning building 3 times to ensure all her students had escaped. She saved 17 children before the ceiling collapsed, trapping her inside. Maria Torres spoke no English, communicating only through her husband's broken translation and the universal language of grief. When Catherine approached their table, she surprised everyone by speaking in fluent Spanish, a skill she had developed during her gap-year travels but rarely used in public settings. The formality that had marked earlier conversations immediately dissolved as Catherine addressed Maria in her native language. "Your daughter was a hero," Catherine said in Spanish, taking Maria's hands in her own. "She saved so many children. Their families will remember her forever." Maria's eyes widened in surprise, then filled with tears as she finally had someone who could understand her words without translation. She began speaking rapidly about Rebecca, describing her daughter's dreams of traveling the world while teaching children, her love for painting watercolor landscapes, and her weekly phone calls home filled with excitement about her new life. William watched this interaction with growing emotion, understanding enough Spanish to follow the conversation. He saw how Catherine's willingness to communicate in Maria's language provided a comfort that transcended cultural barriers. This wasn't about royal duty anymore. It was about human connection in its purest form. The breakthrough moment came when Maria pulled out her phone and showed Catherine a video of Rebecca teaching her Spanish students to sing Happy Birthday in English. The young teacher's joy was infectious as she laughed at her students' pronunciation mistakes while gently correcting them. Rebecca's passion for bridging language barriers through patience and humor was evident in every frame. "She wanted to learn more English," Carlos added in halting words, his voice breaking. "She study every night after school. She say children deserve teacher who speak perfect English." The dedication Rebecca had shown to her craft, despite the language challenges, made her sacrifice even more poignant. She had given her life for children she had known for only a few months but had come to love as her own, word of Catherine's. Spanish conversation spread quietly through the center, and soon other families were approaching the Torres family to share their own memories of Rebecca. Parents described how she had learned their children's names within days, how she stayed late to help struggling students, and how her warm smile had greeted families every morning despite her own nervousness about her English skills. William found himself in conversation with the school's headmaster, who had been wrestling with survivors' guilt since the tragedy. The experienced educator blamed himself for not having better evacuation procedures, for not anticipating such a catastrophic electrical failure. He described the impossible choices he had faced that morning, which children to carry first, which classrooms to evacuate in what order, how to coordinate with emergency responders while watching his school burn around him. "You saved lives," William told him firmly. "The investigation will determine what happened with the electrical system. But that morning, you made decisions that saved dozens of children. Rebecca would want you to remember that." The headmaster's shoulders sagged with relief as someone in authority acknowledged that he had done his best under impossible circumstances. As the afternoon progressed, Catherine continued switching between English and Spanish to help the Torres family communicate with other parents. She facilitated conversations between Maria and the mother of one of Rebecca's students, translating, as the grateful parent described how Rebecca had helped her shy daughter gain confidence in reading. These connections were creating bonds that would support all the families long after the royal visit ended. The power of genuine communication became evident as barriers between families began dissolving. Language differences, cultural backgrounds, and social circumstances that might normally keep people separate seemed insignificant in the face of shared loss. Catherine's linguistic bridge building had created an environment where healing could begin through mutual support and understanding. By late afternoon, something beautiful was emerging from the tragedy's devastation. The community that had been shattered 3 days earlier was beginning to rebuild itself. Not through denial of their loss, but through acknowledgement of how deeply they all cared for these children and teachers. The royal couple's authentic engagement had given everyone permission to grieve openly while finding strength in their connections to each other. The Manchester Community Centre had been transformed into a place of quiet refuge. Soft lighting replaced the usual harsh fluorescence, and volunteers had arranged comfortable seating areas where families could gather away from the crowds outside. The air carried the scent of fresh flowers, donations that had poured in from across the country as people sought ways to express their sympathy. Sarah Mitchell sat in one corner, clutching a small red football jersey that still smelled like her 7-year-old son James. Her husband David held her other hand, his own eyes red from 3 days of tears that seemed endless. Around them, other parents sat in similar states of shocked grief, some holding photographs, others carrying treasured toys that would never again bring joy to their children. When William and Catherine entered the center, the atmosphere shifted subtly. There was no fanfare, no formal announcements. The couple had specifically requested that their arrival be as gentle as possible. They understood that these families needed comfort, not additional stress from royal protocol. The usual formalities would have felt not just inappropriate, but cruel given the circumstances. Catherine approached Sarah Mitchell first, guided by an instinct that transcended any briefing or preparation. She had read about James and his love for football, but seeing his mother's pain made the loss feel immediate and personal. Without hesitation, Catherine sat down beside Sarah, her own eyes filling with tears as she looked at the small jersey. "Tell me about James," Catherine said softly, her voice carrying none of the careful modulation usually required for public appearances. This wasn't a royal engagement. It was one mother trying to honor another mother's child. Sarah's initial surprise at such a direct, personal approach gradually gave way to a need to share her son's story. Meanwhile, William found himself speaking with Tom and Lisa Henderson, whose 6-year-old daughter Mia had been known for her infectious laugh and love of singing. The couple described how Mia would perform impromptu concerts in their living room, using a hairbrush as a microphone and demanding applause after each song. As they spoke, William's composure began to crack, his role as a duke falling away as he connected with them simply as a father. The conversations continued throughout the morning, each interaction deepening the emotional weight of the visit. Catherine spent nearly an hour with Emma Thompson's grandmother, who had been raising the 8-year-old after Emma's parents died in a car accident 2 years earlier. The elderly woman spoke about how Emma had been her reason for getting up each morning, her bright spirit helping heal the grandmother's own grief from losing her daughter. "She would have been so excited to meet a real princess," Emma's grandmother whispered, showing Catherine a drawing the little girl had made of a castle with a princess waving from a tower window. Catherine studied the colorful crayon drawing, noting how Emma had carefully drawn flowers around the castle and added a smiling sun in the corner. The innocence captured in those simple lines made the loss feel even more profound. William discovered that several of the fathers shared his love of rugby and had been coaching their children in local youth leagues. The conversations about sports provided a momentary respite from the overwhelming sadness, but they also highlighted all the future matches these children would never play, all the victories they would never celebrate with their parents cheering from the sidelines. As the hours passed, something remarkable began to happen. The formal distance that usually existed between royalty and the public dissolved completely. Parents found themselves showing William and Catherine not just photographs of their children, but videos on their phones. They shared private moments, birthday parties, bedtime stories, first days of school. The couple watched and listened with complete attention, laughing at funny moments and crying openly at others. The breakthrough moment came when Catherine encountered 5-year-old Lucy's parents, who were struggling with how to explain to Lucy's twin sister why she would never see her sibling again. The surviving twin had been homesick on the day of the fire, a random twist of fate that had saved her life while claiming her sister's. Catherine, drawing on her own experience as a mother, offered gentle suggestions about helping children process grief, while emphasizing that she could never truly understand their specific pain. By early afternoon, the atmosphere in the community center had evolved from one of formal condolence to genuine human connection. Parents who had been strangers 3 days earlier were now supporting each other, sharing stories and finding comfort in their shared experience. William and Catherine's presence had somehow given them permission to grieve openly and find strength in community rather than isolation. The couple's willingness to set aside royal protocol and engage as fellow human beings had created space for authentic healing to begin. The evening brought an unplanned moment that would resonate far beyond Manchester. As families began preparing to leave the community center, 8-year-old Sophie Chun approached Catherine with something clutched tightly in her small hands. Sophie had survived the fire but lost her best friend Annie Walsh in the tragedy. The little girl had barely spoken since the incident, leaving her parents desperately worried about her emotional state. Sophie's parents, Dr. Jennifer Chin and her husband Mark, had been grateful for their daughter's physical survival but were struggling to help her process the trauma. Sophie had witnessed Annie trapped under debris and had been calling her friend's name when firefighters carried her to safety. The guilt of surviving when her best friend did not was overwhelming for someone so young to comprehend. "This is for Annie's mummy," Sophie whispered to Catherine, opening her hands to reveal a small bracelet made of colorful beads. She had spent the previous evening carefully stringing together Annie's favorite colors, purple, pink, and gold. "Annie was making it for Mother's Day, but she didn't get to finish it. I finished it for her." Catherine knelt down to Sophie's eye level, accepting the bracelet with trembling hands. The simple gesture carried such profound love and loss that several nearby adults began crying quietly. Here was a child who had survived trauma but was thinking only of honoring her friend's memory and comforting another grieving parent. The innocence and generosity of the act highlighted the pure intentions children bring to even the darkest situations. "Would you like to give this to Annie's mummy yourself?" Catherine asked gently. Sophie nodded but looked scared, so Catherine took her hand and together they walked across the room to where Helen Walsh sat with her husband Peter. Annie's parents had been among the most devastated. As Annie had been their only child after years of struggling with infertility, the meeting between Sophie and Annie's parents created one of the most emotionally charged moments of the day. Helen Walsh immediately recognized Sophie from school pickup times and birthday parties, where the two girls had been inseparable. When Sophie presented the bracelet and explained how Annie had been making it as a surprise, Helen broke down completely, pulling the little girl into a fierce hug. "Annie loved you so much," Helen whispered through her tears. "She talked about you every single day." Sophie's own composure finally cracked as she told Annie's parents about their last conversation. How Annie had been excited about showing off her new dance moves during assembly that morning. The raw honesty of childhood. Grief was both heartbreaking and healing for everyone present. William watched this interaction while fighting his own emotions. As a father, he understood the profound courage it had taken for Sophie to approach Annie's parents. Children often possess an instinctive understanding of how to honor friendship that adults sometimes lose in their complex grief. Sophie's gesture reminded everyone that healing often comes through simple acts of love rather than complicated words. The bracelet presentation sparked other children present to share their own memories and tributes. Several surviving classmates had brought drawings they had made for their lost friends. Others shared stories about playground games and lunchtime conversations that now carried new significance. These children, who had been quiet and withdrawn since the tragedy, began opening up as they saw adults responding positively to their need to remember their friends. Catherine found herself becoming an informal facilitator for these exchanges, helping children communicate their feelings to grieving parents while ensuring they felt heard and validated. Her experience as a mother guided her in recognizing that children process trauma differently than adults, often needing concrete ways to express abstract emotions, Like loss and survivor guilt, one particularly powerful moment occurred when 7-year-old Marcus Williams approached William with a drawing of the school's playground. Marcus had been in Rebecca Torres's class and had drawn himself and his deceased classmate Jamie playing football together, with Rebecca watching from nearby. The drawing showed the school before the fire, capturing a moment of pure childhood joy that would never be repeated. Miss Rebecca always said we were getting better at football, Marcus told William seriously. She was going to teach us more tricks after the holidays. The future tense he used revealed how children struggle to understand the permanence of death. Still planning for interactions that would never occur. William spent several minutes examining the drawing with Marcus, asking questions about the games they played and the rules Miss Rebecca had taught them. This validation of Marcus's memory seemed to provide comfort, as if ensuring adults remembered these details would keep the experiences alive. As evening approached, the spontaneous memorial activities had created an unexpected sense of community among the survivors. Children who might have felt isolated in their trauma were discovering they shared similar feelings and memories. Parents who had been struggling to help their surviving children were finding guidance through watching how other families navigated similar conversations. The royal couple's presence had provided a framework that made these difficult conversations possible. But it was the community members themselves who were doing the real work of healing. Catherine and William had simply created safe space for authentic grieving and remembrance to occur naturally among people who needed each other's support. As the formal portion of the visit neared its end, an extraordinary decision was made that would transform the day from a royal engagement into something far more meaningful. The original schedule called for William and Catherine to depart by early evening, but witnessing the healing connections forming among the families made leaving feel premature. After a quiet consultation between themselves, they chose to extend their stay indefinitely. "We're not leaving until you're ready for us to go," Catherine told the gathered families, abandoning all pretense of royal schedule requirements. This unprecedented break from protocol sent ripples through their security detail and staff, but the couple remained firm. They recognized that authentic support couldn't be constrained by timetables or official obligations. The decision to stay created space for the most profound moment of the entire visit. As darkness fell outside, someone suggested lighting candles to honor the children and teachers who had died. What began as a simple gesture evolved into something much more powerful when Helen Walsh, Annie's mother, stood up with a candle in her hands and began speaking about her daughter. "Annie wanted to be a ballerina," Helen said, her voice steady despite her tears. "She practiced her pirouettes in our kitchen every morning before school. She would spin and spin until she got dizzy, then laugh until she fell down." The image of Annie's morning routine brought smiles through tears, showing how joy and sorrow could coexist in memory, one by one. Other parents stood to share similar memories, each lighting a candle as they spoke. James Mitchell's father described his son's collection of football cards, which he organized obsessively and knew by heart. Emma Thompson's grandmother talked about Emma's drawings of unicorns, which covered the refrigerator at home and would remain there forever. Catherine and William listened to each tribute with complete attention, their own candles casting gentle light on faces marked by grief, but also by love. The informal ceremony had no religious affiliation or official structure, yet it felt deeply sacred as each family honored their lost child's unique spirit. The most moving tribute came from Maria Torres, who spoke in Spanish about her daughter Rebecca while Catherine translated for the group. Maria described Rebecca's determination to become an excellent teacher despite the language barriers, her weekend study sessions to improve her English, and her letters home filled with affection for her new students. "She wrote to me that teaching children was like watching flowers grow," Catherine translated as Maria continued. "Each day brought new blooms, new surprises. She said even when children made mistakes, she could see their potential growing stronger." Rebecca's perspective on education revealed her deep understanding of childhood development and her genuine love for nurturing young minds. As more candles were lit, The community center transformed into an intimate memorial space. The formal fluorescent lighting had been dimmed, leaving only the warm glow of dozens of individual flames representing individual lives and collective grief. Children who had been restless earlier were now sitting quietly beside their parents, understanding instinctively that something important was happening. The candlelight ceremony reached its emotional peak when Sophie Chun asked if she could light a candle for Annie, her small voice carried across the silent room as she spoke about their friendship, their shared dreams of having sleepovers every weekend, and their plan to be in each other's weddings when they grew up. Sophie's innocent perspective on friendship highlighted how children love without reservation and expect their connections to last forever. William found his composure breaking as he watched these parents transform their devastating loss into celebration of their children's lives. The strength required to speak publicly about beloved children who would never come home demonstrated a courage he wasn't sure he could summon in similar circumstances. Yet these ordinary parents were finding ways to honor their children's memories while supporting each other through unimaginable grief. The evening concluded with a moment of silence that felt profound rather than empty. In the candlelit room, surrounded by photographs and memories, the presence of the lost children and teachers seemed almost tangible. The silence wasn't about absence, but about love that continues despite physical loss. Catherine's decision to speak Spanish with Maria Torres had opened channels of communication that transcended language barriers. William's willingness to engage authentically with grieving fathers had created bonds based on shared humanity rather than royal protocol. Together, they had helped create an environment where healing could begin through community support rather than isolation. As families eventually began preparing to leave, many exchanged contact information, planning to stay connected beyond this single day. The tragedy that had shattered their community was inadvertently creating new relationships that would provide ongoing support. Children who had survived were forming friendships with other survivors. Understanding they shared experiences that would bond them for life, the royal couple's extended presence had given everyone permission to grieve thoroughly and love openly, setting a foundation for long-term healing that would extend far beyond the immediate crisis. The final moment of the visit created an image that would be remembered long after the news coverage faded. As William and Catherine prepared to leave the community center well past midnight, they encountered a sight that perfectly captured the day's profound impact. Many families had chosen to remain throughout the evening, finding comfort in each other's company that they weren't ready to abandon. By returning to empty homes filled with painful reminders rather than making formal goodbyes, the royal couple made a decision that would define their legacy among these families forever. They removed their formal shoes and sat cross-legged on the floor among the families, joining an impromptu circle that had formed around the remaining candles. This simple physical gesture of equality spoke volumes about their understanding that rank and protocol had no place in authentic grief. In this informal gathering, parents continued sharing stories while children dozed against their shoulders or played quietly nearby. The atmosphere had evolved from one of formal condolence to genuine community support, with the royal presence serving as a catalyst for connections that would endure long after their departure. William and Catherine had become part of the healing process rather than mere observers of it. The conversation turned to practical matters as families began discussing how to support each other through the difficult weeks ahead. Funeral arrangements needed coordination, surviving children required counseling support, and parents faced the challenge of returning to work while processing overwhelming grief. Catherine found herself taking notes on her phone, promising to connect families with appropriate resources and professional support services. One of the most significant developments was the formation of what would later become the Annie Walsh Foundation. Inspired by Sophie Chun's bracelet presentation and Helen Walsh's desire to honor her daughter's love of friendship, the foundation would provide support for children who survived traumatic events, helping them process grief while maintaining connections to lost friends through positive memorial activities. William committed to serving as the foundation's patron, understanding that royal support would help secure funding and public attention for childhood trauma recovery programs. This wasn't merely ceremonial involvement. He promised regular personal engagement with the Foundation's work, ensuring that the connections formed during this visit would translate into lasting institutional support. As dawn approached, the extraordinary nature of what had occurred became clear. A routine royal visit had transformed into something unprecedented in modern monarchy, genuine engagement with public grief that transcended symbolic presence. The couple's willingness to abandon protocol in favor of authentic human connection had created space for healing that formal condolences could never have provided. The departure itself was unlike any royal exit in recent memory. Instead of formal handshakes and protocol-driven pleasantries, William and Catherine received hugs from grieving parents, drawings from surviving children, and promises to stay in touch from families who had found unexpected friendship through shared tragedy. The usual barriers between royalty and subjects had dissolved completely. The most lasting image from the entire visit came as their car pulled away from the community center. Catherine was seen through the vehicle's rear window, still wearing the colorful bead bracelet Sophie had given her for Annie's mother. She had chosen to keep wearing it throughout the evening, and photographers captured her touching the bracelet as they departed. This small gesture communicated more about genuine care than any official statement could have achieved. The public response to the visit was immediate and overwhelming. Social media filled with praise for the couple's authentic engagement, but more importantly, donations began pouring in for the newly formed foundation and support services for the affected families. The royal presence had amplified public attention in ways that translated into concrete assistance for those who needed it most. Within weeks, the visit's impact extended far beyond Manchester. Other royal family members began adopting similar approaches to public grief, abandoning formal distance in favor of genuine engagement when communities faced tragedy. The precedent set by William and Catherine's authentic presence influenced how the monarchy would respond to future crises. The children who survived the tragedy would carry memories of the day when a future king and queen sat on the floor with their families, listened to their stories, and cried alongside them. These memories would become part of their healing narrative, evidence that their loss mattered to people in positions of great responsibility and influence. Years later, the families involved would describe the visit not as a royal engagement, but as the day their community began healing. The tragedy had shattered their world, but the genuine human response they received from William and Catherine had shown them that rebuilding was possible through authentic connection and mutual support. Their silent gesture of simply being present, of choosing grief over protocol, had indeed moved millions and demonstrated the profound power of shared humanity in the face of incomprehensible loss.